Hey everybody, welcome back to Let's Summarize Ministries. I'm Mickey Emerson, and we're here as a product of Christ-Centered Men. You can find us on YouTube or on fccop.info. That's our church website here at First Christian Church of Pinckneyville, right here in Southern Illinois. And what I do is I take papers that I've written on each one of the judges, and I give a summary of that judge. I try to give a little insight into that individual's life, what was going on around him, what was going on with the people, the Israelites at the time. And this go round, we're going to be talking about a gentleman by the name of Jephthah. All right, Jephthah's his name. And prior to this, we had Tola and we had Jair, each of which had about 2 verses. That was it. And now we've got a gentleman that has 2 chapters dedicated to him. There's a lot going on with Jephthah. And what I have, if you want to take a look in your Bibles, you'll go through chapter 10, verse 6 through chapter 12, verse 7. That covers Jephthah and his exploits. So what I've written here is that God has a way of allowing us to make our own mistakes and to falter on our own. He has given us free will, and we exercise that quite frequently. So he will not force us to obey him. He doesn't want robots. He will not applaud our transgressions either, and he will not support an unhealthy lifestyle. So while he gives us free will, he most certainly will not rejoice when we make bad decisions. He will correct those decisions, try to help us grow on our own. So he will, however, allow us to suffer the consequences of our actions to see if we recognize who is really in control. When we think of control, control is an illusion from our standpoint. We are never truly in control of anything. There are so many outside factors that God is involved with, that any control that we think we might have is really an illusion. All right. So he will raise up the unlikeliest of heroes in our lives to do his will, and to be sure to be kind to everyone that you come across, because you never know who it is that he's using to rise up to do his will. He will also certainly hold us accountable for our word, and we'll find that later on through Jephthah's exploits, what happens to him later on. If we profess his name and seek his will, he will most certainly deliver us from evil. And that enters us into the forgetfulness and the noble warrior of Jephthah. All right, so once again, after 45 years of peace, quiet, and relative obedience, the nation of Israel does evil in the sight of the Lord. Once upon a time, I counted how many times that's said in the book of Judges, and I don't recall what that was, but it was a large number. Once again, they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And sometimes what happens is our lives become a little too humdrum, a little too dull, a little too boring. And we find this desire to venture out and to seek unsavory practices as a means to spice things up a little bit. And it is possible that the Israelites had become bored, they had become lackadaisical with the easy, humdrum lifestyle that they had. Of course, they were prosperous, God had blessed them. They weren't getting the excitement that they needed. It is also a matter of life that we grow forgetful and we lose track of things. We lose track of who is in control. We lose track of who is our deliverer, of who is our salvation. All right, we lose track of who our Creator is. And so after 45 years of peace and obedience, the Israelites had forgotten who was responsible for their simple and prosperous way of life. And they had forgotten who was responsible for all that they had, as well as who had judged them and who had led them out of captivity time and time and time again. And they didn't just fall into sin. They took it a step further. They started adding a few additional priorities here and there. They completely forgot about God. And they put everything that they could possibly think of ahead of him. And this is when God shows his hand. He shows the royal flush on them and allows the Philistines and the Ammonites to infiltrate the Jewish people. All right, one from the southwest, one from the northeast. For 18 long years, God allowed them to be in bondage to the Philistines and the Ammonites. And their enemies, whose gods they had felt the desire to worship, had come from both sides to crush them like a millstone. So they had forgotten about God, and they had had a desire to have what their neighbors had. And so to have what they had, they started living their way of life. They started worshiping what they worshiped and doing what they did, serving the pagan gods that God had strictly prohibited. So this is when the Israelites, and let's face it, you and I as well, because we all do it. All right, the Old Testament is so crucial and critical to our lives because it is a blueprint of us. You know, we may look at that and say, wow, look what they did. They did this again. They fell short again. Well, you and I do it every single day, only it's not written down in black and white. Thank God for that. But they finally cried out to God, and when things finally became so unbearable that they realized they could not survive on their own devices. But what really are our devices that we attempt to lean on? I say that because all that we have is a product of God in the first place. So when we deny Him the responsibility of our blessings, He is more often than not going to intervene because He is a jealous God. And you can get that from the book of Exodus chapter 20. But when it comes to our pride and our worship of things that are around us, His intervention will likely be something that we would rather do without. And such was the case for the Israelites. 18 long years of oppression to the sons of Ammon and the Philistines. And this is when God gets brutal. When they finally cried out to the Lord after 18 long years, He reminds them of all the times that He had delivered them from their enemies and all of the times that He had saved them. And He is the one responsible for all of the blessings, and yet they continue to turn to false gods. So what does God say? He says, go and cry out to the gods that you have chosen. Let them deliver you in your time of distress. That is wicked from God. I would hate to hear that from Him. I mean, that gives me chills just thinking about hearing those words from Him. You know, that's like kind of like going out and hearing, I never knew you. You know, it's heart-wrenching. You know, but they continue to pray and they continue to ask God for forgiveness and for peace and for deliverance. And when God finally says, you want to worship false idols and the things that your mind has concocted, then let those things deliver you. But you know what you do? You only come to me when you need something. All right? And so he lays it on them, and he gives them a guilt trip, as rightly so. They needed it. They needed a wake-up call. But that's when he does give deliverance. He has to punish, but after the punishment, he gives deliverance. And as they camped out, waiting to face the sons of Ammon in battle, prepared to face their adversaries on their own, that's when God raised up this valiant warrior by the name of Jephthah. And he was going to lead them to freedom. So that's when we enter Jephthah. He's the son of Gilead. And while his father was apparently wealthy to some extent, he was the son of a harlot. So his father had extramarital affairs. But when it came time to collect the inheritance of his father, the legitimate brothers didn't want anything to do with him, and they kicked him out so that he couldn't take part in the inheritance. And so he had to depart, and he goes to the land of Tob. Tob or Tob, T-O-B, however we want to pronounce it. Salvation isn't based upon our pronunciation of this word, and that's all right. So he gets there, and he becomes a valiant warrior. And you have this group of indigent men that surround him, that they latch on to him. I get the impression that along with this group of men lacking property or income, he would protect the communities from marauders, much like David will later do in 1 Samuel. And he raid the homes of the invaders, such as the sons of Ammon, and while taking payment for the protection that he provided. So during his time, spiritually, he remains committed to the Lord, so much so that he is listed amongst the rock stars of faith in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. And the Lord will show him favor. It is at this time that the elders of Israel seek him out, apparently well known for his exploits and skill, although this would be a tall task to tackle. He would have to go from running off handfuls of villains to defeating an entire nation. So this is also a bit of animosity between Jephthah and the elders, and he makes this abundantly clear as they approach him. This is where I strongly urge everybody to take a look into chapters 10, 11, and 12, because you'll get a lot of insight into what I'm saying. I'm giving you a very summarized view of what's going on here. But there's a bit of animosity as they approach him. When his brothers expelled him and kept him from getting the inheritance, they had to get permission from the elders to do so. So the elders gave them permission to expel Jephthah. So now the ones that expelled him are going to him for help. That takes a bit of audacity to request such a thing, and he lets them know it very much so. So, of course, they ensure him that this will be his time of redemption and payback, and that he will now lead the nation, and the elders and his brothers will be required to be submissive to his decision making. But that's not what he has in mind. He's not concerned with honor and glory. The elders and his brothers are, but he is not. So, with the hour of battle upon him, Jephthah looks out and he witnesses his enemy firsthand, and he's a bit shook by the numbers, because all it is right now is him and his gang of marauders going up against the sons of Ammon, a large number. All right. Now, again, I urge you to take a look into these chapters, because you'll get to see how he goes about attacking the sons of Ammon. Jared, our awesome tech guy, will put a map up there, and you'll get to see where it is he is and where the Ammonites come from, up to the area of Gilead, where he's going to storm, where he's going to invade. And so you get to see that he, from the verses of the Bible, that he makes kind of like a loop around to ambush them. It's at this time that his faith actually begins to falter. And in exchange for victory over the sons of Ammon, he makes a vow to God that will prove to be incredibly costly. Although the Spirit of the Lord is already upon him, he panics, and he feels compelled to make this pagan bargain with God. And he pledges that if the Lord delivers the enemy into his hands, whatever greets him at home when he returns, he will sacrifice to the Lord. Now, this was strictly out of panic, as the law of Moses prohibits such practice. Deuteronomy 12 tells us that, and makes many other areas of the Bible. But nonetheless, Jephthah takes his vow, and he goes into battle, wiping out the Ammonites, and in such a brutal fashion that he also takes out 20 of their villages along with it. And the Lord gave them into his hands, and he was to return home victorious. So now I get this vision of him defeating the sons of Ammon and returning home. And I think of like Sir Lancelot, Richard the Lionheart, one of those great leaders, going home to this wonderful crowd, this parade, throwing roses at his feet, cheering him on. And they're screaming his name, they're giving him shouts, and then he gets home, he passes his hometown, and he enters the confines of his property to be greeted by none other than his daughter playing a tambourine. Welcome home, Dad. She is proud of her father, and she can't wait to hug him and tell him how wonderful he is. But at the sight of his daughter, devastation sets in. His vow to the Lord is at the forefront of his mind. At this point, he has to sit her down, and he has to tell her what he's done. Imagine what that was like. Gut-wrenching. So, the vow to the Lord is no small matter, as she is the victim of his vow. She weeps uncontrollably, but she understands what must be done, and she is willing to do whatever is necessary to stay righteous in the eyes of the Lord, including giving up her own life. But what she does, she requests time to soak this in. And she retreats with her friends to the mountains so that she can mourn her death as a virgin. See, as I understand it, for the Jews at this time, it was considered a disgrace and a curse to die childless, because you hadn't contributed to the peoples, and you hadn't contributed to the possibility of the coming Messiah. This was a big deal. And in my contention, she must have been probably somewhere around 14 years old, a young teenage girl. All right, and Hebrew ladies married quite young at that age. And we are told that once her time of mourning had expired, she came down from the mountains, and the vow to the Lord was carried out, and she never knew a man. Now, this is quite difficult to imagine. Slaying your own child in order to fulfill a vow to God, a vow that he didn't even have to make in the first place. Deuteronomy 12 and 18, as well as Leviticus 18, strictly prohibit such practices, as I mentioned before, and even comparing it to what the pagans did to please Molech is what they do. So, I wonder if Jephthah thought back to Abraham and Isaac, wondering if a goat will come out of the thicket to be a substitute for his daughter. Was the vow merely symbolic in nature? And did it simply result in her life being devoted to the Lord? Hence the multiple references to her virginity. She may have lived the rest of her life and never known a man. That's what we'd like to think. But how do we tie in such a hideous act with the reference to Jephthah with the great men of faith in the book of Hebrews? It's difficult for that dichotomy to take place. And I say that even with the great men committed notorious sins. All right, Moses disobeyed God. He struck the rock and even committed murder. All right, David committed adultery, slayed his own soldier, led to public humiliation and loss of a child. Rahab, she was a harlot. Samson, all right, he messed with filthy meat when he dug his hands into the lion for the honey. All right, he also had relations with multiple women. All right, they did not lead perfect lives, but their focus was consistently on the Lord. And so we can say that for Jephthah, is that his focus was consistently on the Lord, even when he stumbled. So when it comes to him, I suppose God did not require or imply that he make a vow. But the Spirit of the Lord had already come upon him in the first place, so the vow was completely unnecessary to complete his mission. But I like to think that she was not laid up as an offering. It never says that he laid her on the rocks, that he set the fire. It never goes that deep into detail. It leaves a little bit to the imagination. So that is purely I like to think that it might be purely symbolic, that our nameless heroine lived the remainder of her life quietly devoted to the Lord with the pain of never knowing a man or having the opportunity to contribute to the coming Messiah. Maybe she was just devoted to the Lord for the days of her life, much like Samuel. I like to think that she lived to have a nice, loving relationship with her father, with her parents, and that she forgave him for his foolish vow. But, as again, I have strongly urged everyone to dive into these two chapters. You get to see that the Israelites, we're going to back up a little bit, the Israelites had set up shop down below because they were going to attack the sons of Ammon. And Jephthah just went ahead without them. So we're rewinding, and now they're still back there twiddling their thumbs like, well, Jephthah just did all the work. And they're angry. Because we could end it here, but there's this matter of Ephraim. It was Ephraim, that's down below, southern kingdom. And they were prepared to fight. And so they were willing to help defeat the enemy with Jephthah, but they wanted to do it for their own glory. Jephthah was in it for the Lord. So this is not what our judge was in it for. His purpose was to be... After we get the story of Jephthah and his daughter, we have another transition. And if you look into the chapter 12 of the book of Judges, you can see that transition that goes from his daughter back to the Israelites. The gentleman down at Ephraim that had initially staged battle against Ammon. But he had gone ahead without him. And so now you've got this anger from the people of Ephraim with Jephthah because he went ahead and went to battle without them. And so while they're left twiddling their thumbs, he went ahead and slayed the sons of Ammon. See, they were willing to help defeat the enemy with Jephthah, but they were merely there for their own glory. This was not what our judge was in it for. His purpose was to be pleasing to God. That was first and foremost for him. They even went so far as to threaten to burn down his house in retaliation. And of course, this most certainly did not sit well for our protagonist, as he gathered his men and he took out the people of Ephraim handily, showing that they were much better barkers than biters. And as salt on the wound, he told them that they had to get permission to pass the river Jordan in their own land. But there was a catch to that, because he had a password in order to cross the Jordan, the word shibboleth. All right? For those who are Masons, you'll recognize that word. But it means flowing river. And in the Hebrew, it had an unusual pronunciation. And the Ephraimites had trouble trouble pronouncing it because of the letter H. They struggled with their H's, and so they had difficulty pronouncing the word Shibboleth. So when they would try to cross the Jordan, their accent would give them away. So through it all, Jephthah was devoted to the Lord and his land. He struggled, but he lived a difficult life, and he judged for a relatively short 6 years, but he was most certainly a man of faith. So what we can do is we can learn from this example that the Spirit of God is with us. All right, it is more than enough to conquer our adversaries, whether it be flesh or spirit. All right, and we are told that our enemy is not flesh, but is of the Spirit. All right, and that we also learn that God's house is always worth defending. So, as we finish up with Jephthah, I just want to thank you all for tuning in, and I want to remind you that the revenge, the justice is that of the Lord. Okay, we are there to seek His will, do His will, and He will act. All right, let us not grow weary, let us not grow tired, but let us fight the good fight of faith. Have faith that He will prevail, because He will. All right, so please stay in prayer and stay devoted. Read your scripture, read your Bibles. Please look through Judges chapters 10 through 12 and learn about Jephthah. There's a lot more in there than what I had to say. So I thank you all for tuning in. God bless you all and have a great night.